I'm curious if any of you, or hopefully I'm inviting all of you, if you have a word or two or a short sentence to share in the chat box, what it is that called you here today. And while that may or may not be going on, I would just say how much I appreciate the fact that some of you who attended the first two actually asked for another dive into politics. And Holly came up with the idea of Bardo, and I haven't really spent time on the concept of the Bardo since my first introduction to the Dharma through the Tibetan lineages, whatever, close to 30 years ago. And so it's been a great gift to get ready for this talk, to take me back to those roots and that powerful concept. So I appreciate that. And I'm really happy to have spent that time and getting ready for this. And it has given me a greater sense of peace and during this very challenging time that we're all facing. Also want to say, just remind myself as much as anyone else that everything I'm going to say here is just my opinion and shouldn't be taken as anything more than that. Jeff gave me some credit to being an expert perhaps in politics. I don't think I'm any more of an expert than anyone else. I have spent a lot of time on the Hill, as some of you know, lobbying for climate. And it has given me the opportunity to really experience politics deeply and on a personal basis with those who are actually doing it, the members of Congress and their staff. And it's given me a great perspective and appreciation for how challenging it is for them. And it's our responsibility to help them understand what it is we want them to do for us, because they are working for us in our system. So I'm going to talk first about the general concept of the Bardo before we get into politics. And I was reminded as I got into this that my first exposure in a very surface way was the Tibetan Book of the Dead back in college. It's a short book. I don't know whether any of you have read it, but if you don't know what it is you're reading, it's virtually impossible to understand. I read a page or two, but I was very careful about making sure that it was on the top of all of my engineering books when I walked around school, because I thought the girls would think it was pretty cool. I'm not sure it really worked, but that was my surface exposure. And I didn't really understand what it was until I got in. I discovered the book that Songyon Rinpoche wrote, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And he goes in deeply into the concept of the Bardo, and the Tibetan Book of the Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks of the Bardo Thodol, the Great Bardo. The Bardo, as most of you may know, the in-between period from when one dies to rebirth. And that typically is a 49-day period, recognized, I think, quite strongly throughout all the Tibetan lineages, but in many of the Buddhist lineages as well, as the period of extra prayer when someone has passed. It's 49 days. And being the Great Bardo and being the in-between period between when one actually dies and rebirth occurs, the preparation through our life to get ready for that very challenging period of great groundlessness. And why don't you go ahead and throw that picture up, Jeff. This is a picture Jeff's going to be sharing of Palden Lamo, who is, as you can see, quite the wrathful being. And for some reason, I became very connected with her when I first started practicing. And those of you who know the Tibetan practice will know that they're the Vajrayana, as opposed to the original Theravada or the insight meditation type of stuff that Goenka teaches. And then the Mahayana, which is what Zen is part of. This is the tantric practice. And these types of images are used to help us during that transition period that the Tibetans have so clearly outlined over their centuries of practice. Their internauts as opposed to astronauts in terms of studying the mind, the true nature of mind. It's interesting when you look at a picture like this, you can see flayed skin and skulls and blood and flames. And, it's a pretty scary vision. And that's the point, because the teachings will tell you that this transition in that Bardo between life, death, and rebirth is full of all kinds of threats and scary things. It's an absolute groundless time. And in our existence, it's the most groundless time, it's taught, that one experiences. So getting used to seeing wrathful images, and particularly seeing protectresses and protectors like Palden Lamo and Mahakala and others, you hopefully can call them to help you through this difficult transition. So let's put that down, Jeff. I don't want to scare everybody too much. And it's the Bardo. But what's taught, and I think this is what I think a lot of people forget, is that is just one in-between period. That period is defined by the life that precedes the dying and death, and then the life that might follow. The life itself that we live is broken up into other sections in the teachings between the sort of normal day-to-day reality in which we live, but the states of dreaming, when we're asleep and dreaming, is separate from that, as is our state when we are meditating. And then that reality of life itself is broken into different segments in terms of our age, when we're infants, and then when we're toddlers, and when we're adolescents and young adults, older adults. Each of those are different stages, and each of those have their own transitions, and each of those have their own sense of groundlessness. And we have the opportunity with those different states, as each of them gets broken down. This event is taught eventually, and I think this is true, that as we step down into each moment, each breath, those are also Bardos. So when you take a breath and exhale, at the end of that exhale, as many of you have been taught when you're meditating, that's a period of transition. That's a period of a death of a breath. And each moment is a change. So this opportunity to see the impermanence of each and everything, every moment, helps us to remember that we are, in a sense, in this the delusion of life, this great dream world in which we live, which is separate from the true nature of mind, the one that is called enlightenment, liberation. Those are the types of things that we can take out of all of that. And I found being reminded of that opportunity to look at each of those groundless moments as a point for liberation. It's made it a lot easier for me to step into the political world and to really sit with this very challenging time that we have in our election cycle. And we have the opportunity to see each of these news cycles that come up, the polls that come out, as another way to practice the three tenets, to be comfortable with not knowing what this really means, to be really comfortable with bearing witness to what is really happening without our perceptions about how horrible or how good one bit of news may be. And then what action do we take from that bearing witness with a not knowing mind? What is the appropriate response, which of course is the challenge of the Bodhisattva vow, one of the vows of the four Bodhisattva vows. And we're Zen group mostly. We don't speak of Bardos in Zen, but we speak of Dharma gates. And of course, Dharma gates are virtually the same concept, I think. We step through each one. Each is a transition. And we want to really embrace and embody that groundlessness as we go through those gates. And the political roles, the election cycle right now, which is causing so much grief, so much angst, so much concern, fear, hope, all kinds of feelings, is a really important time to recognize it for what it is. It's just another transition. And I think for a lot of people, this transition isn't just about this election. This big unknown, this great groundlessness started when Trump was elected in 16. So it's never really, that election never really ended, I think, for a lot of people. And that's caused an extra challenge as we go into it. And as we wait for the results, which may or may not come when there was one we would have thought 4 years ago and 8 years ago, and that waiting after the election is over until the results are determined will be another Bardo, will be another transition period. And we can look at it as we can look at our this election that's going on, not with fear, not with a hope of attachment, but with it's another not knowing. It's another there's no certainty here. There's no attachment. Well, hopefully one can recognize the fact that, of course, there's attachment, but it's recognizing it as attachment, not holding it too tightly, and trying to embrace this uncertainty, try to embrace this. That's what I've been doing. And as I said, I found as I dove back into my first exposure to the Bardo concept, I took a deep breath and was like, yeah, okay. This is what it is. This whole thing is a big delusion. And our life is a preparation for our next, and getting back to the Tibetan teachings of the big in-between, the period of 49 days between death and rebirth. Our whole life is to practice to handle that great groundlessness in a way that takes us to the true nature of mind, to a way that allows us to really recognize the dream in which we're living now, whatever Bardo we're going through, to step through all of that, to take this great uncertainty and embrace it and use it as a way to find our true nature of mind, to be enlightened, to be liberated from our attachments to what we think life ought to be. And I hope that helps. But what I really am looking forward to is, rather than spend a lot of time banging my gums, to have us explore together how we're feeling and what this feels like to us, and how much hopefully we find the practice, however that shows up for us, as helping us navigate this election, this political Bardo, as well as the rest of the Bardos of life. So we have a couple of thoughts in the chat box. I'll just, I guess everybody can see them, but I'll read them. The opportunity to explore the challenges of the political climate as it relates to practice, and conflict and tension between the sense of impending relief and impending disaster. Yes, that's a great description of the classic sense of duality, isn't it? But I just to the first point, for me, in Zen Peacemakers, of course, for us, we're very much about social action, 3 tenets, social action, meditation. And for me, social action shows up in terms of being engaged in the political world. It's not to say I don't do more normally accepted or recognized senses of social action in terms of helping to provide food for people that need it, and address homelessness where I can. But politics is just like the rest of life. It's part of life, and it's something that can cause a lot of suffering. It's something that can cause a lot of can reduce suffering. And so I think it's an important place to be engaged. So I think politics as practice is a great practice. I mean, that's what I find. I find it tests me a lot. And I find that when I can stay with the three tenets, when I'm going into a meeting or when I'm looking at a challenge, I'm free to see it clearly, and I'm free from my own sense of grief or suffering or worry about what's going to happen. I try to show up with best intention and keep that clear. So I'm going to end there, Jeff, and hopefully I've sort of stirred it up a bit. I'm happy to talk about the Bardo. I'm happy to talk about politics. But I'm most of all just happy to see you all here. So thanks for joining this.
Thank you, Grant. And with that, I think let's open the conversation if we could. And you know, I recognize everyone. We've all been together more than a few times, so everyone knows how this works. If you'd like to raise your electronic hand, it's, if nothing else, it's fun and entertaining. But I can see everybody too. So if you'd like to speak, go ahead and wave your hand and then unmute yourself. And Graham, you just did a chat. Would you like to vocalize what you wrote, or do you prefer to leave it written? And welcome from the UK, by the way.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, I've just taken a bit of trouble to unmute myself there. Basically, yes, I'm zooming in from the UK, and our political problems differ to yours, but they generate the same fears and anxieties. We're very concerned with leaving the European Union at the moment, and I, as an educated liberal elite person, I rail a lot against what I perceive to be stupidity. And I found your previous two sessions very helpful to try and take on board a wider picture and appreciate that, you know, even someone you oppose is still part of you. And thank you very much for that.
Yeah, well, I think thank you for reminding us of that, because it's true. And I think we can see our own opinions only when we recognize them as just our opinions. I mean, I think those of us, particularly those of us who have been blessed with the opportunity to have a higher education. I'm reminded of Hume's great observation that reason supports the passions, right? So it's your feelings that get you all wound up. And if you're really educated and you've got all of that great knowledge, then you apply that knowledge to support the passion that you're feeling. It's not the reverse. We don't use our reason to figure out how we ought to feel. We feel first. And what I think so many of us forget, and I know this when I'm walking in the world and trying to work very diligently to get bipartisan solutions, we forget that people near and far have a very different perception of the same reality, the same experiences that are happening, but their perceptions are quite different. And we get motivated by tribal leaders, we get motivated by those we emulate, we get motivated by fear of one thing, but the folks that we're afraid of have opinions about other things, and so we assume that all those opinions are all wrong because, yeah, it's a challenge. But this is what I loved about diving back into the Bardo, was it was another reminder that if we can remember that, then we can step into that with a sense of liberation and freedom. Like, oh, wait a minute, it's just my opinion. And yeah, I know that's horrible what's going on, but let's remember, Grant, you had strong opinions about one thing or another 5 and 10 and 15 years ago, and they're different now too, just within, you know. So thanks, Graham. And I pray for the UK too.
Thanks, Graham. It's refreshing always for us here in the colonies to hear from you. Anyone else? Glad that made you chuckle. Anyone else? Please wave your hand. And Shishin Roshi, I was hoping we would hear from you. Thank you.
I thank you, and thank you, Grant, for your talk. And it's my first time I've been to one of these sessions, but doesn't stop me from having an opinion. When you said that people, react to their emotions or feelings, and then the thoughts come in, and then they rationalize it. Doesn't that make it difficult to have dialogue across the aisles? Because when people see things, they react to it viscerally, and then when the reason comes in, then all they try to do is justify the reactions. And you're unique, I'm sure, in a lot of your interactions, and that you see the mind of not knowing, but most people don't. And so I don't see how there can be any logical dialogue going on. So you have to find a place where their emotions intersect. Is that the way you approach it?
Well, I'm not unique. I don't feel comfortable wearing that, but I do my best. And I find that when I do keep the three tenets in mind, that as I said before, I have a sense of freedom. But I think yes, you identify a problem that's becoming more and more entrenched and more more difficult. However, those of us who aspire to build the dialogue, and those of us who can carry the three tenets in each moment, not just in politics, but in relationships, all relationships, but then the appropriate action that comes out of that it takes a step towards that dialogue, hopefully. And it can be that you might need to meet with someone for 6 or 8 times and not really talk about any issue of any importance at all. You just build a relationship. And one of the classic I don't know whether it's a trick or manipulation or just tools for finding common ground is, talk about your grandchildren, talk about things that you love about nature, and get people to relax. What's happening these days, and it depends on your perspective and where you fall in the political spectrum, but it's either you are on full defense mode and you have the full shield up, or you're in full attack mode and you got the spear out. And when it goes either, it seems like it has to be either way. And when we can each break our own cycle in terms of that approach, put the spear down, put the shield down, and just listen, there's a chance. But it is hard. And I think it's harder now than it has been for a long, long time. But I can tell you, and it was just earlier this week or late last week, great interview between Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat, and Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican, where they were talking about the need for a bipartisan solution on climate. And the Republican actually said, Lisa Murkowski, who is a very grounded, I'm very impressed with her, as I am with Senator Whitehouse. She said, and we need to put carbon pricing on the table, which is, one of the things that I've been working so hard on. And those conversations are going on. But we need to be careful, whichever tribe we're part of, we need to be careful that we don't add our raging voice to what the tribe is saying, unless we really, truly think that's going to be helpful. And I think that's the challenge. So it is tricky. Thank you. But it's great practice. It really is great practice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roshi. I should probably always sit back and go last, but maybe this will prompt some other conversation too. And I don't mean to be a provocateur here.
You can't help yourself, though.
I know I can't help myself. It's in my nature. I really appreciate what you said, and bringing our practice to this is what we, it's our life. It is what we need to do. And it's so easy to get caught up in a position, isn't it? But what I want to hold out is that there are some things that go on that are so clearly and demonstrably evil or a threat that there really isn't much in the way of, hey, let's sit down, let me hear your perspective about children in cages. We're doing an event beginning on Saturday, and I know this is a rhetorical crime to make this comparison, so I'm not even going to name it. But in the 30s, had some well-meaning people with rifles assassinated the leaders of the Third Reich, the world would have been a different place. That's loving action in my mind, and that's a hypothetical. That didn't happen. I'm always challenged with both. And I will form this in a question, Grant. I promise somehow I'll get to a question. I'll try to do it quickly too. While maintaining that mind of not knowing and not holding on to my position, I'm always challenged in some of these circumstances. For instance, did Lisa Murkowski vote against logging the Tongass that just happened? The Trump administration is reaping havoc through the environment. And there's no nuance about this. It's demonstrably evil. And somebody needs to stop them. But at the same time, and I'm criticizing myself here too, in our discourse, it's so easy to go into the binary. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. And these, many of these issues are not binary. They're very, very nuanced and very, very subtle. I'm not sure how nuanced or subtle kids in cages in Arizona or Texas is. To me, that's rather binary, but maybe I have not evolved to the point where I can see the nuance of that, where I can see the other guy's side of that. So practicing with this, it's a challenge for me, and maybe I am a provocateur, and maybe I do make bigger issues out of some of these, but I honestly do feel in my heart that some of these issues are existential, and then there isn't time to sit down and listen to that other guy's side. We need to somehow verbally, legally, judicially, legislatively, and let me not go further than that, stop them from doing it. So I don't want to throw a bomb into the middle of this conversation, but
no, it's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's just your opinion.
It is just my opinion, man.
Right? I think that's important to remember.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not here to defend children in cages, but there it is.
Yeah.
What is it? Without the knowing mind of what it is already, what is it? Bear witness to it. What is it? And what is it in its larger sense? And then from that, what is the appropriate action? Right? That's it. It's simple to say, but that's it. I remember reading, and I believe it was one of these truth Dalai Lama quotes, because there's a lot, as you may know, of Dalai Lama quotes that go around that he did. And they're not bad quotes, but he's like, that's not how he speaks, and you can check it out. He didn't. It's not right. But would you have killed Hitler? Would that have been an appropriate action to kill him? As you just, I don't know whether you said it or implied it, but I think we all got the message. And his answer was, if I knew if I were a true Bodhisattva, if I truly knew the future and what that would be and whether that would truly reduce all suffering, then I would, but I'm not that. I don't know. So that would seem to many people to be an obvious place that would justify killing. Of course, that's right. Of course, that's virtuous action. We don't know.
Mhm.
We don't know. And I think one of the things for those who are upset with Trump and what Trump has done, it's really Trump is embodying feelings that have always been there and haven't gone away, and we have not addressed. And so while it's easy for us all, in a sense, to blame him or to be happy with him, depends on your perspective. He's put a voice to what was already there, and it's sadly it's become okay for this kind of behavior because it's caused a lot of suffering. But, and I don't know, I truly don't know. This isn't practicing not knowing. I don't know whether or not 4 years from now, this horrendous wound that has been ripped wide open won't be healing properly from the inside, and we'll be better off in 4, 8, 10 years because we never have addressed this. And it's only because of what's happening now that some of us white folks are figuring it out, that we really have had a privilege that we were completely ignorant of because we had that privilege of being ignorant of it. There's a black man in the White House, no problem. What are you worried about? Why do you keep killing yourself? You got to, it's your problem. No fathers in the home. No, I don't, it's like, we have to see, but how do we show up each moment with each relationship, with each conversation? How do we show up? How do we really bear witness with what's going on? Because it's easy to say there's a lot of duality here. And of course we see much of life, this relative reality is defined by duality, right? But we're trying to step through that as practitioners, or I'm trying to step through it. And when I can step through it in those sadly too brief times, too few and too brief times, then I feel that freedom. And I think that I'm able to show up in a way that helps better than if I bring that knowing mind, and if I have a great certainty and a self-righteousness in terms of my view. Hope that helps.
It does help. Thanks, Grant.
But by the way, if you gave me the key and I could unlock the cages, I would. Okay, I can tell you that.
Me too. We have some time, so please, if somebody'd like to, Adrian, hi, thanks so much for go ahead and unmute yourself, and
hi, thanks.
Love to hear from you.
I wanted to share an experience that I had this past weekend, that we took some time off to travel to a nearby town. And so my wife and I were strolling through the street quite a bit, and everybody wearing their masks, of course, and lots of hand sanitizer everywhere, keeping distance and so on. There is this kind of fashion that's appeared because the politicians, when they're on TV, they wear their masks. So the right party started to sport a mask with the Spanish flag on the right-hand side. And the left party started to sport the flag on the left-hand side. And now you go on the street and you find these masks everywhere. And I found myself just checking which side the flag was on. And I could already start to see the bias it produced in me. So I don't go checking skin color. I don't go checking how you dress yourself. But suddenly I was checking where the flag was. And then I realized how that immediately put me in a certain mode when approaching this person. So I haven't met this person. I haven't talked to them yet, but I already have an inclination towards that person. And I think we just wear these parties as our identity. And I think that's just maybe the problem. We identify ourselves with the party in the same way sometimes that we identify ourselves as fans of a certain football team or whatever. And from that perspective, it's really hard to have any constructive conversation, because if it's like when you go to see your favorite team and you support them, whatever they do, right? They do something wrong on the field, and you still support them because it's your identity. That's who you are, and so you belong to that tribe. So I only see that becoming more and more entrenched and harder to break apart. And so I think it's becoming harder and harder to have constructive conversations. And even when I try, I see these masks and I start having judgments. So I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, thank you. I can feel the hair standing up in the back of my head, hairless head. I think the challenge is sports teams for sure, but the problem is in politics, it's the country that the other side's talking about, and it's our certainty, and the more fired up each side gets, the more fired up the other side gets, right? It's just like our certainty that they're going to ruin the country gives us even more energy than about a football team that just played a game and now the season's over, and we were looking at cricket. Well, you wouldn't in Spain, of course, but so what occurs to me as you're telling that story is maybe you could start a movement to have flags in the middle, right? And the other thought that arose for me, which came up, and David mentioned this yesterday in a great talk we had with Mark Eckhart, talking about the testimonies of Black people in 1 Million Truths and the challenges of being a Black person, particularly in the US. And then again, something those of us who are white really have no clue about. And David pointed out, excuse me for talking on you, David, here, but he in his neighborhood, which doesn't have any Black people, like a lot of, we are naturally, or one would say structurally segregated in many of our housing. You don't see many Black people. And what practice he's given himself is when he sees the rare Black person walking down the sidewalk, he notices it, and then he sends them generosity and compassion and love. I would suggest that when you see the flag on the wrong side, I'm not going to try to take a guess, but when you see the flag on the wrong side, send them, in your mind and in your heart, send them love and compassion and generosity. Because what we've done to each other now is we've created this incredibly powerful projection of if someone wears a Trump hat or a Biden hat, the other side sees that and they know exactly everything about that person. They know all their views and they're sure of it. And their parents, their children, their grandparents, they've got loves and losses and challenges and disappointments and things they agree with you on and you don't even know. But our certainty of othering them with absolute certainty prevents that conversation. Put the mask in the middle. That would stir things up. Hell, I might start doing that here.
Hi there. Yeah, go ahead and unmute and.
Me?
John. I think John was first, and then we'll go to David.
Hey, thanks. This has been a good talk. Sorry I was a little bit late. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a group around the country that y'all might know of called Better Angels, which has been, trying to convince folks who identify as red or blue to have relationships and conversations and to train others on how to talk across the political lines. And it's funny because I've participated with some friends of mine in that, and we don't have a problem with dialogue or conversations. It's actually only until if you can acknowledge that the candidates don't represent your views 100%, then you can actually continue to have conversation with nuance. But at the end of the day, you do have to make a decision on who you're going to vote for. And I think in some ways the candidates themselves narrow the field of discussion because they believe what they believe, and we have to endorse, one or the other in that case. But I think if we can remind ourselves that our own perspectives are much broader and deeper than what the candidates themselves represent, that's helpful. And again, we don't know. There are some people who are one issue voters, and there are others that are socially or fiscally believe certain things, and then that overrides everything else. And so, as the fortunate thing I think we have right now in the United States is that one candidate, I mean, both candidates don't represent the diversity of the people in their identified parties, because both tents are bigger than the candidates represent. And we have an incredible number of people who identify as unaffiliated and independent now, even though they might have a tendency to vote one way or another. And part of that identification is that I don't get represented by the party platform, so to speak, which we've seen at least on the Republican side. They didn't even have a platform this year, right? They just endorsed the 2016 platform again. And so I actually think that in this move, you know, if Biden actually wins, I actually think that that's really wonderful from the country's perspective, because the Republican Party is going to have to reimagine themselves outside of this charismatic leader that they've had. And the Democratic Party is going to have to grapple with all of its depth and breadth of edges. So I actually think beyond just having a potential unifier as a president with Biden, we actually, from a larger perspective, it's an opportunity for the whole country to reimagine the issues and the parties in a new kind of way. Because right now, I don't think I think the American people are deeper and broader, as we know, than the candidates represent. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, good points. And I think in one of the earlier talks, I think it was Adrian that pointed out the benefits of the multi-party system in Spain, which we don't benefit from here. We're stuck with this forced duality. And to your earlier point on the candidates not speaking to what people want, I think the candidates, and this has been going on forever. I mean, this is the way political candidates work. They want to fire up the tribe, and one of the tools they're using now is fear of the other tribe. And so a lot of the things they say, they don't really believe. They're just firing up the tribe. And I think Trump is a great example of that. Is I think Trump reflects his crowd. I don't think he has original thoughts, really. He just loves being the celebrity. And he's tapped into this deep feeling of, poor white folks, and America's losing what I thought it was. And here's this guy up there doing it. They roar, so he says more. I don't think it's really any more thought out than that. And it has, in my opinion, ruined the GOP. And I think the country's lost something when it lost a real GOP as opposed to a TOP or TNP, Trump New Party. So you're right. And I think there's exhaustion in the middle. There's so many people that have that view. I think there's a lot of people that are hoping, seeing more of what I think you were saying, that there's a chance for the GOP to arise again as a rational balance to the Democrats, more so than the fact that they think Biden can unite. I'm not confused. I mean, it's my opinion, of course, only, but Biden wins, even with the landslide. There's not going to be any unifying of the country. There's going to be a lot of angry people that are going to take a long time to process. Yeah, so it's a very, very tricky time, and it's very easy. I mean, I've got a family and friends who, and I'll get caught in this, who are just like completely demoralized and think it's the end of the country and we're going to have a civil war and all of that stuff. I'm not telling you that's not going to happen. I don't think it does. But if it does, it does. There's no point worrying about it now. What can you do now to diminish that divisiveness that's powering all of that? As individuals, what can we do each day when we speak to people? And it's a challenge. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know other than to try to, when I can, to find the common ground, to have the conversation that's with another human as opposed to some projected jerk who's in the wrong party. What can we agree on? And I would say, just to come back to Jeff's intentionally provocative lock up the kids in the cages bomb, I don't think there's anybody on any side that really would say, I'm in favor of locking up, separating kids and locking them in their cages. I don't think anyone's in favor of that. Truly, Jeff, well, very few people. But there are a lot of people who would say, yes, that's very sad. That's an unfortunate consequence for the need to manage our borders better. That they would say that, but no one's in, like, it takes joy out of very few people. I'm, I imagine there's some, but it's just not human. Anyway, sorry, I went on a little longer, John. Thank you.
That's good. And John, thanks so much. That was thought provoking for sure. And Grant, thanks for. And I just want to insert a couple of things here. Shishin Roshi had to drop out. His internet went down, so he just sent me a text with his apologies. So I want to pass that along to everyone. He would still be here otherwise. And second, perhaps this is for Graham and Adrian's benefit. In fact, we do have a lot of other parties here in the United States. There are probably a dozen other parties on the presidential ballot. And I was most tickled by the fellow whose nickname was Cancer. I was not enticed to vote for him, but the fact that he made the federal ballot was interesting. And then again, this is just my view, and then I want to call on David. The GOP 2.0 just might be the Lincoln Project. I'm not sure. We'll have to see what they do. They're standing in opposition at this point, and quite effectively so, raising tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But the brain trust of the GOP exited and went to the Lincoln Project, and we'll have to see what they do.
Well, let's be clear. The brain trust did not leave the GOP. A small portion of, if you want to call it the brain trust, the leadership left the GOP, and they've left it in a way that the majority of the GOP doesn't like and thinks they've just done this to create really high-paying jobs for themselves for this period, and they're getting well paid for their effort. So. Point taken. Yeah, I'm not sure the Lincoln Project, as much as I would love it if that would become a core of the GOP, but it's not going to be anything quick. It's going to be ugly in that process.
Yeah, point taken.
David, please.
Rescue us.
Well, I'm willing to leave the floor open on the politics side, but I was going to just share something about what Grant said about our conversation yesterday. So if you're open to it, I'll just share it. It's on the practice side.
Sure. And forgive me for stepping in there without your permission beforehand. I figured it'd be safe.
It is safe for today and for the future. And I feel you feeling me, Grant, and I appreciate that. And what I want to say also is in response to what Jerry put in the chat. There is a moment between recognizing the other and that generosity practice that you talked about. And that's what Mark asked me about yesterday. At least that's what I heard him ask me about. And sitting here right now after your statement about my answer to him, it's a Bardo. There's a Bardo there between recognition and action, and it's the not knowing. And I'm not often that progressed, Jerry, to know just like me, but I am progressed enough to know there's more over there than what I think I see. And honoring there's more over there allows that generosity.
Yeah, good. Thanks, David.
I just wanted to add, I see the just like me meditation more as an aspiration. And I felt uncomfortable around, people who were substantially different from me racially or culturally or language or whatever. And I do practice that on the spot when I remember to, because we all share, the same fears and desires and, suffering. That's part of our practice. And so I found that helpful. And like you, I'm not as evolved enough to practice that with the people who make me crazy every day. So, yeah. Thank you.
We have a few more minutes if somebody who hasn't shared would like to. Or if you have. Hi, Bob.
I'm going to the virtual Auschwitz retreat at the end of the week. And I go to Auschwitz as often as I can. When Bernie set up the first retreat, it was his plan to sit by the tracks and read the names of the people killed and to read names of the guards. But he had to abandon that when it became clear that there would be a rebellion and people would walk away. It's my practice there to read names of guards and inmates. And that brings me to a place of not knowing that I hope I can apply in this post-election time.
Thanks, Bob. I've been a guest teacher for a Sangha down in Florida. In the winters, have been blessed to be able to be down there. And it's a small one. And it's at a UU church. And when we end our meditation and our talk and sort of dedicate the practice of that evening, I've frequently dedicated to the well-being of our politicians, to the well-being of all of our politicians. And I've had folks ask later on, well, how can you dedicate that to Trump? And it's the same reason that you mentioned the guards' names, because, and as Graham mentioned earlier, I mean, we're all part of each other. I mean, this is, it's Indra's net. I mean, there is in the ultimate sense no other. So that's a beautiful practice, Bob. Thanks.
We might have time for one more question or comment if someone is inclined.
Real quick, I just wanted to share. Thanks to everyone. I've had a lot of struggle with politics in my family. COVID has only exacerbated that. I'm also having work done in my house. That's why I haven't been participating, if you can hear the saw in the background. And I think this is just what I needed to reorient myself, especially as for practice. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. It's very helpful for me. This all passes, it all passes. It's all impermanent. And the Tibetans do a great job at teaching that all of life is just one big dream, different versions of a dream, and we can break them down into different Bardos or different things. But our Dharma, in Zen, our Dharma gates are each moment's another Dharma gate. Each moment's another opportunity to be reminded that it's the Dharma and it's a gate and it's the next moment and a chance to embrace that groundlessness. Actually, if you need to consciously try to create a sense of groundlessness true, not knowing and no physical comfort. When I can pull it off, which is far too rare and far too brief, it's incredible freedom. There's a lot of suffering going on, and I want to take the opportunity, if I may, Jeff, to sort of end this practice and just dedicate it to all of those folks who are suffering with COVID, who are suffering in ways that those of us who are privileged enough to have an internet connection, privileged enough to have a phone or a contact, aren't suffering. It's you read the paper in a sort of, I don't want to say dismissive way, but in the financial news today, there's forecasts of millions of people having run out of their savings. In January, millions of people being kicked out of their homes because they can't pay their rent anymore. Whew. So let's dedicate our practice to those folks today. Thank you.